Hello. Last spring, the board of directors of the Prairie Brook Homeowners Association of the city of Olathe, Kansas, of which I'm a member, had an agonizing decision to make. We'd had to decide whether to open our pool or not. And due to the COVID-19 pandemic and fears, we consulted with our legal and insurance advisors regarding liability in case anybody claimed they got the virus while they were in the pool. We were not assured that we would not have exemption from liability. But we decided to open the pool anyway. And we're glad we did because it provided organized recreational activities for the families in our community and offered a safe place in hindsight for these activities to happen. That was one of the reasons I chose Plagues, Pandemics, and Viruses to read and review with you. Heather Quinlan, the author, is a former children's book editor who's now a freelance writer and filmmaker. The second reason I selected this book is I wanted to compare our current COVID-19 pandemic to the Spanish flu pandemic of a century ago, and also with the infamous Black Death of the Middle Ages. Summary of the book. Albert Camus and his plague really reflects what's in this book. Is that what does it mean, the plague? It's life after all. Plagues, viruses, pandemics have been with us since ancient history and are part of our life stories. And this book covers the plague of ancient Athens all the way through our current coronaviruses, included COVID-19. Highlights of the book. Every major pandemic and public health crisis since ancient Athens is summarized. Unusual background information is shared. By unusual, I mean that what you normally don't get in a regular history book. And social and political implications are included. I created this sample table to show the pandemic comparisons between the Black Death, Spanish flu, and COVID-19. One thing you can see is that even though a death of anyone is important, especially a family member or a friend, by the standards of the Spanish flu and Black Death, our numbers are way down in terms of the Earth's population. We need to keep that in mind, how advanced we've come. In terms of stopping viruses who are constantly mutating all the time. Think of the book, I like to think of the book as like a fairly good hamburger. It's got a rather hard, crunchy top bun with sesame seeds to get in your teeth. That's the opening of the book. Then you got this lower part of the bun, which is very soft, soggy, and not very nutritious. That is the closing of the book. Then you got the meat, cheese, tomato, and lettuce. That's the center of the hamburger. That is the center of the book. So look at the strengths. Bird's eye view of gripping stories and successes and failures. Stories of heroes and villains. Fascinating photographs and drawings. Some superb definitions and information are included in this book. A virus is defined as bad news wrapped in a protein. A pandemic is every person. Quarantine is isolation for 40 days. That's a technical term. Not 7 or 14, but 40 days. COVID-19, the number comes from 2019, the year of its discovery, not that there was 18 previous COVID. And Bayer aspirin was blamed by some for the Spanish flu because the aspirin was manufactured by a company in Germany, a country we were at war with at the time. Weaknesses of the book. Like I said, the start was a little crunchy and hard. That was it. It sounded, I read like a textbook of medicine. My eyes glazed over and I said, oh no, I hope this is not the totality of this book. It wasn't, but it was a hard start for me. I expanded my sample table listing the Black Death and Spanish flu and COVID-19, including, and the author was superb and given in trade, alternate theories, and political and social implications for both the Black Death, Spanish flu, as well as the other pandemics that was written about in the book. What I haven't read are items that she did not include. She did not talk about the global context of COVID-19 as globalism, did not include impeachment, BLM protests, the presidential election as the US context, did not include alternate theories for what could have happened. How did COVID get going? Like, for example, a China bioweapons lab. Not saying it's true, but what I'm saying is it wasn't even mentioned as an alternative theory. Social and political implications, nothing was mentioned about. Online shopping, online education, business shutdowns, stay-at-home orders, First Amendment rights, vaccines, people movement from state to state and from city to the countryside, and the changing tax bases in these states and cities that have outward migration. So all in all, I gave this book 3 stars. If I was generous, it'd be 3.5, but I think 3 because an updated revision is definitely needed once this pandemic is over. And in her defense, the pandemic is not over, but not even mentioned, not even taking educated guesses about the implications and the context was detrimental to the quality of her book. Quotes out of this book. Page 41 from Angelo di Tura of Sierra, Italy during the Black Plague. Father abandoned child, wife husband, one brother another, for the illness seemed to strike throughout breath and sight. And so they died, and one more can be found to bury the dead for money or friendship. Members of the household brought their dead to a ditch as best they could. In Siena, great pits were dug and piled deep with the multitude of dead. And I, Angelo di Tura, buried my 5 children with my own hands. And there was also those who were so sparsely covered with earth that the dogs dragged them forth and devoured many bodies throughout the city. Human suffering, the center focus of all pandemics and epidemics and public health crisis. Page 269, during the Spanish flu section, the author quotes John Barry, who wrote another book devoted exclusively for the Spanish flu called The Great Influenza. He wrote, because we are at war, the national public health leaders basically lied to the public. They said things like, this is ordinary influenza by another name, or you have nothing to fear. Proper precautions are taken, so forth and so on. This was echoed by local leaders in many cities, Philadelphia being a prime example. So they had a big Liberty Loan parade scheduled, which they declined to cancel, though all the medical community urged them to. And 48 hours later, just like clockwork, influenza exploded in the city. And eventually, approximately 14,500 people died in Philadelphia alone. So truth and transparency are often the first casualties of wars and pandemics. Page 279 deals with public health crises have long-term consequences beyond the immediate situation. And I just wonder if the same is going to hold true for COVID-19. She wrote, U.S. Army enlisted data taken from those born between 1915 and 1922 found that men born in 1919 were 0.05 inches shorter than the average height of other enlisted men. Furthermore, people born just after the flu pandemics had higher rates of physical disabilities, performed worse in academic tests, and earned a lower income to those born before or after the pandemic. There's a belief that a link exists between an expected mother's having the flu and a child's cardiac health, height, and/or risk of mental illness. Page 290 is a quote about the governments that rarely learn from their mistakes. We only hope that an exception will be made with this one, COVID-19, that we'll learn from our mistakes. After SARS, the Chinese government vowed that it would not be a repeat of the situation. But the author went on to write, at the same time, exotic animals being sold as food and medicine was and is a big business in China. Everything from cats to wolf pups to porcupines were locked up, cheek by jowl in cages, biting, scratching, urinating, and defecating on each other, while people handled them without any form of protection. The country's food safety standards and sanitation were practically non-existent despite numerous government-led attempts to improve them. Food poisoning is distressing regular. Markets that weren't licensed to trade in live species nevertheless did so unchecked. Workers were trained in basic hygiene techniques like glove wearing and hand washing. Dangerous additives were used to increase production. Health inspectors were bribed. And we yearn for a world without bacteria. On page 368 and 69, the author writes, without bacteria, we would have freedom from moldy bread and bad breath. But now imagine what would happen to all the world's dead. After all, microbes don't kill everything, so all that lives still has to die. Bacteria, for example, recycle the nutrients of dead plants and animals back into the ground, so the next generation of plants can grow. Without them, dead people, dead plants, dead giraffes, dead sharks, and dead azaleas would keep piling upon each other. Since the nutrients aren't going anywhere, plants don't grow, we all starve, we die, and the pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Final thoughts on leadership in the virus. Since we are studying leadership, and the author really didn't cover that very well, I want to offer my own thoughts about how to take care of leadership in the virus or during the virus. The big mistake I believe the Trump administration made, and believe me, there was lots of mistakes on both the Trump administration and his political opponents dealing with this virus, is that he did not have one person, one voice speaking out. He had a multitude of voices, and I call this dueling banjos. Think of the scene from, if you've seen the movie Deliverance, it's a very dark movie and I won't even go into the details. But the music of the dueling banjos, one banjo trying to get out louder and more musical than the other banjo. Here's, for the Trump administration, two skeletons dueling banjos. I think the same for the Biden administration has started out with good intentions, but they're having multitude of voices offering contradictory information that have to be corrected. And we're just in the first week of his administration, and they've already dueling banjos have started. What kind of person could lead such a thing? Well, I'll offer a prototype of one in the past, and one I think the Biden administration would be wise to use. Admiral Thad Allen of the U.S. Coast Guard was appointed by President Bush to be the principal federal officer for the Hurricane Katrina recovery after the initial recovery officer, who was the director of FEMA, was removed because of a poor job. And he was considered an excellent job of the recovery. He was appointed by President Obama to be the National Incident Commander for the BP Horizon oil spill recovery in the Gulf of Mexico. Admiral Allen is an adaptive leader who puts people first and can get results by coordinating interagency efforts across numerous jurisdictions. In other words, he is skillful in all four organizational frames we've been discussing, whether it's structural, human resource, political, or symbolic. He can get the job done. And is an example of the type of leader any president needs to appoint to lead our national response to a pandemic. If I was advising President Biden, and I'm still waiting for that White House call, Jeffrey Zients would be a great person to be his leader in the response. He had service as President Obama as in various capacities. He was called Mr. Fix-It in the White House. For example, he came in and fixed cash for clunkers. He came in and repaired the Obama healthcare website, as well as being appointed director of the National Economic Council. Appointed by President Biden to be counselor to the president in the White House. But even though he has the title of White House COVID-19 Response Coordinator, we're already seeing other voices speaking out once again. Someone like Mr. Zients should be in charge of the federal recovery efforts and coordinate that and be the spokesman and the mastermind behind it. Doesn't mean other people can't be involved. Like Admiral Allen called in a great team of people. He called them dogs that hunt, people who got the skills and the motivation to do a good job. And there's more than enough people ready to assist Mr. Zients if he's appointed not the coordinator, but the relief commander for COVID-19. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you. If anybody would like copies of the slides, I will send them to you upon request.